We're getting into just before you start, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but really being prepared and just having a goal or an idea before you even pick up the guitar. Like, what are we trying to do? What's the essence of what we're trying to do? What's the song about? Like, not necessarily theme-wise, like lyric content, but what is the focus of the guitar in the song? Like, what is its essence? Is the guitar the primary focus in the song? I mean, obviously it all plays into each other, but you know, sometimes as with any musician in the band, you know, sometimes you have to realize it's not about you, and you have to either know what it's like. All right, this song is guitar driven. I have to step up, and we're gonna really get the tone and dial in the tone and make the focus the guitar. Or is the vocal, is it more of a singy type of vocal, or are we trying to serve, you know, are we trying to serve the vocal? We're trying to serve the song. Are the drums the focus? Are we trying to really lock in on a kind of a syncopated kind of thing with the drums, or what are we trying to do? And a lot of this is obviously stuff that you're doing when, you know, ideally when you're in a band and you're writing the songs before, you've kind of fleshed all that out. But if you're working at home and you're kind of like just recording yourself and you're isolated, it's like, you know, especially if you're just a guitar player and then that's what you do and you're recording yourself, and you know, maybe you're making it too much about the guitar. Maybe you're not serving the song. So it's really just having a goal and really trying to get to the core of what it is that we're going to be recording, and really trying to serve that. And the other thing is, a main thing is also, don't try to force it. You know, don't try and put, you know, 15 notes in where 5 will do. You know, it's always an important thing. And you know, what the choices we make sonically are going to influence what we're playing, and vice versa. So, you want to chime in on anything on that, or?
Nope.
Yeah. And again, I went back to before saying about going on YouTube and isolating guitar tracks. But you know what? A great thing to do, you know, like it gets to the core of what influences you. So it's like, listen to records. Like, what's a good guitar sound? Like, well, oh, I love, you know, somebody mentioned the Black Album, Metallica, and it's like, man, okay, that's a great guitar sound. Okay, how do we get close to that without even necessarily knowing what gear is used? If you don't know that, I mean, like nowadays you can probably find that, but it's like, how do you develop the listening skill to hear that sound and go, oh man, that's like, okay, just break the sound up into its individual components. Well, the bottom end, just deal with the bottom end. The bottom end on this is really focused, or it's really loose and it's kind of like wide and tubby. And it's like, okay, so let's like dial in and figure out what the bottom end sounds like. What does the mid-range sound like? Is the mid-range forward? Is the mid-range, does it sound like it's scooped? Where the mid-range is very down? Like in metal, that's a very common thing. They you know, even like a graphic EQ, you know, like making the smiley face, but it's like the scooped sound where it's like less mids and more just really lows and highs. So you're dealing with that boom and like that attack, that really bright kind of, for like all the palm muty stuff. My focus a lot of times, you know, mid-range is your friend in terms of EQ, but you know, so I don't necessarily always like the scoopy, you know, like super scoopy, like no mid on the guitar thing. But you know, if you're listening to a sound and that you think that's the sound, like try and, you know, just try and listen and imitate, just as if you could imitate a voice, or you imitate like someone do an impersonation, or you hear somebody's, the way they talk, we have a weird sounding voice, and you imitate that. It's the same thing when you're listening to a guitar sound. You listen to it and the guitar's like, I mean, it's like silly, but you make these noises like.
He did a Steve Perry impression once that blew my mind, and all he kept saying was like, "It's no different than when you get a guitar tone. You just like figure out the tones."
It's kind of it's funny because like
that's a hard one, Steve Perry. That's a hard one to do. I mean, he's trained ear here.
No, but the funny thing is, maybe that's just something that it was like a skill set of mine because like, one of the other little things, like when I grow up, I want to be this, and like I wanted to like I had a little brief dream of being like Rich Little, being an impersonator guy, because I could do a lot of different voices. Like I know how to do that. I don't know, I just don't know how, but I can imitate things. Like I hear things and I can imitate them. So it's like I apply that concept honestly to like not just guitar, but anything in the studio. Like I hear the guitar and I go, oh, there's this mid-range frequency, and you kind of like almost mouth the sound. And you go, oh, it's got this like, and you find, that's almost how I'm getting EQ. I'm hearing like that. It's like, oh, what is this? What is it? Is it like, or is it, like, and just doing that little simple act of like mimicking, like with your mouth, like the sound, and hearing that in your head, like it'll help you even dial in the tone at the amp. And like you can hear characteristics and like focus on a specific section of it, even though I know I'm breaking it down into its very basic element and like really dissecting it. But like I said, listen to the low end. How's the low end? Is it tight? Is it loose? How's the high end? Is it really bright? Is it shrill? Or how's the mid range? Is it forward? Is it back? It's stuff like that. So, and you listen to records and that's great. And then you figure out and kind of like identify that. It's like you can go back and forth and like. A big tool for me in the studio, and even like a lot of, even on home setups, a lot of them, they have like little basic interfaces have like a thing for an external source. So you could patch in like a CD or anything, like, or an MP3 player or whatever, and you can go back and forth. And I do that. I'll do that a lot, like or based on a sound that we've gotten before, or even on a different song. I'll pull up a rough mix of a song, and I'll listen to the guitar sound and go, we need to get closer to this, and I'll flip back and forth between, even though it's in a track, I'll flip back and forth between something that I like and go, okay, and it's not even necessarily completely mimicking it, like straight imitation. It's just moving towards that. What draws you to that sound to begin with? So it's literally just kind of like taking something, and it's never going exactly, but it's moving towards that. I always say that kind of thing. So listen to records, pull down a bunch of records. What inspires you? What sounds great? And that's a great starting point. Until you build up your own toolkit and your own repertoire of what at least as starting points. It's always starting points. Like I said, all this is based on my experience, and all these are not the end result, they're the beginning point. So until you build that and have all those little things in your back pocket to know to pull out and go, oh, this, that, like this, I need this, I need a really, aggressive sound. Let's try this amp to start with, because I know this is an aggressive amp, So until you get all that, pull up records, and I still do it to this day. Like pull up records, listen to what you like. This sounds great, and just really go towards that. YouTube's another great resource. And again, on YouTube, the isolated guitar tracks. If there's a song that in particular, you might just Google it and see if they have an isolated tracks. Because, like I said, there's a lot of them out there. I think a lot of it came from like all those Guitar Hero and Rock Band and all that stuff, because a lot of people had to pull the sessions up, and I actually did a Dillinger song for Rock Band, for Guitar Hero, and you have to like take the multi-tracks and basically remix them and put them into stems so they can in the video game, but somehow these things, through the magic of whatever on the internet, these things have happened to leak out. And you're able to, there's a great resource out there that you're able to like listen to the guitar sounds that you like, that and you can, at least, it gives you a good starting point. And and then figuring out, like I said, developing that toolkit of what you need to get to that idea. So, all right, live versus studio. Here's where this is a good one to.
Yeah,
this is a great talking point.
yeah.
What do you need to do and think about differently? To me, they're very different, but at the same time, my approach to recording is always to try and capture that feeling that I always get when I would see a band live. You know, that feeling. And if you've ever seen videos, or if you look up on YouTube and look at videos of what they do live, you know, that's just like full on, like, you know, just, it's
But
Tasmanian
what I
devil.
learned from you though is that, you know, to get that spirit isn't necessarily this. You don't necessarily use the same approach tone-wise to get the spirit across. So, for instance, first coming in the studio, I brought in with me my amps, how I would play it live in practice and stuff like. So there's certain things you don't consider, like it's one guitar. You're not layering. So there's that. You're trying to make it sound thick right off the bat. You're trying to make it sound loud and thick and come across. You're trying to cover up mistakes. You're not playing perfectly. You can't always keep up with the drummer. You sometimes miss a note. So you're putting a lot more gain probably on it live than you necessarily might in the studio. There's a lot of things like that you don't consider. So what I did learn starting to record for real was that it's the end result you're going for, not the individual tone itself that we talked about, and thinking ahead like that on for the building blocks. So right away, I mean, those are things that
yeah,
were
thinking
different.
ahead is a big thing for me, and it's something I developed because of going back to my original theme is commit, and recording on tape, you only have X amount of tracks, so you had to, it's almost like a chess game, you had to think 5 moves ahead. You had to know kind of like what your track layout was going to be. It's like, oh, we only have four or five tracks for guitar. Okay, we're going to have to, you know, we can't layer in all this stuff. Or if we layer in guitars, and if we layer a bunch of guitars and we want it to stay that way, then we're going to have to take them and then take like 4 tracks or 5 tracks and bounce it to 2. We're going to have to actually bounce the tracks down and make a mini blend of that, and we're going to commit to that blend.
Right.
And that's
now
it.
You don't
and we're
have to
locked
do that.
in, because
you don't
then
have to do that now. But
you don't have to do that now. But I still take that same approach because, again, I believe, you know, I mean, you know, all the classic records that I've, you know, grew up on and everything like that, they were all made with that kind of thing. It's like limited choices. It kind of like forces your hand to really develop and getting it right at the source, and sticking
and
to
building
it,
on
and building on that, and
clean, good takes that then create a
to
godly
create the
record eventually.
Right, exactly.
You know, God is in the details. So, and you can't make the details. You can't go backwards. You know,
With the committing thing,
you have to commit.
Like I said, if you're bouncing 4
Yeah.
tracks down, if you're bouncing a bunch of guitar tracks down, and like you're trying to make this really wall of like this rhythm guitars, and I've done it where, yeah, it's like 6 tracks, and it's like I'm done on tape, and it's like, okay, well, we're out of track. We don't have any room for the vocal. Okay, let's take these 6 and take the last 2 tracks that we have open here and bounce them down to a stereo blend, and we got it. And then
Right.
these ones are getting erased, so these tracks better be good, and then that blend better be good.
Right. So
Because
you have
that's it. We're living with
You
it.
have to go to do it right from the beginning.
Right.
But one thing I realized though in doing that is that sometimes you go in the studio. The intention is, as you say, what's the intention here? What's the intent of what you're trying to do? And sometimes you go in knowing exactly what the intent is. I'm going for this thing right here. I want this Black Album sound, or this is the vibe I'm going for right here. And sometimes when you're just a bunch of musicians in a room jamming, there's a lot of loose ends. You don't know how it's going to turn out or what you want out of it until you start committing. So there's the part of it where you're committing because you know exactly what you were going to do and you were practiced and you were ready and you knew what you were going for. And then there's the side of it like committing, so then you can make that decision after you've committed. Now you've figured out the intent. All right, so we did this take, it has this vibe, it sounds like this, now we have to complement that and keep building on that. And everything's going to be tight and right, and you're going to be able to present the best
and obviously
holistic approach from that point. So,
sure.
like, I think it's important to really clarify that, like, sometimes the committing isn't only because, like, in the old days you couldn't have the option because everyone's going to say, well, Steve, now you can. But once you do get that philosophy down, you start to learn how to really know what the intent is moving forward once you make those decisions for the whole band to then complement that.
Yeah, it's again because you're committing, like, because I learned that way early on, and then I was always say, don't be afraid to be wrong, and you can, okay, if you really mess up, you're gonna have to go backwards, and you're taking more time, and you're gonna have to take the steps to correct it. But again, you're now taking the choice. It forces you to take that choice, and it's like, right, how do you complement what you already did, and layer on top of that, and how to build on top of that. So it's a big thing to think about. And like I said, to me, developing that muscle of really committing and getting the tone right at the source is the most important thing, because that is your building block. That's just like a house. Like you have you build this basic thing and you get this foundation that's really solid. Everything else on top of that's going to be awesome, because the core of what it is and the intent of what you're trying to accomplish is always going to be there, and it's not going to go away.
And going back to live versus studio, again, sometimes just the ability to sit there and make everything really tight and on point, and once you have that intent, and maybe you retract the drums first, and you see where the drummer was going with it and where they were accenting and what energy, and it was a little ahead as opposed to behind. So now you're tracking, knowing what that intent is, knowing what the energy is and what the vibe is. You're creating tone for that. You're tracking, you're performing for that, and that's something you don't have the luxury to do live. So while, like I said, live I may put more gain on and things because there's a little bit of a mess, and we're trying to kind of blend all these things and glue them together in a way that you necessarily wouldn't have, that you necessarily can't do in this like you were in the studio. Now in the studio, what I learned is, like, immediately Steve would start taking gain off my guitar, and he'd start saying, okay, and I'm like, but it's supposed to be heavy. Why is it clean? Why does it sound clean? And he's
right,
like, well, watch, let's layer 4 of these and make them right and have them all happen at the same time. And when a whole band is coming at you, and every instrument, every take is coming at you like a spear in your face, there's nothing more aggressive and heavy than that. And that's one thing that's completely different than live. Live, you're just trying to get through it, and you're just trying to cover up mistakes, and you're performing, and you're doing all these things. But to get that across in the studio, there may be different techniques in order to do that.
Because, it's funny because, like, and we'll definitely dive into this later, but yeah, I found through my experience, unless, especially for like the tight metal, really tight metal stuff, honestly, it's when you really listen and you go, oh man, that's such a heavy guitar sound. It's not as much gain as you think it is. It's actually a little bit less than you really think it is. And a lot of it, which goes from the next thing we'll get into, but it comes from your hands. I call it heavy hands, but like the tone comes from your hands. And it's like the aggression is all about the intent that you put behind it and the force that you're applying to the guitar. And just
you can't hear that if it's covered with gain.
You can't, no. Because sometimes too much gain will actually make it sound less aggressive. It'll get soggy, and it's just like nothing. And then a lot of times the guitar player will they'll think the gain is everything, and they're making up for their lack of like attack on the guitar, and they're using a really thin pick, and they're just like that. And it's like they're trying to it's like you're trying to get something that goes and they're going like with like a lot of gain, and it's just that sounds like that's what it winds up sounding like. And they go, that sounds good, and you're like, no, it doesn't. But then again, it could sound good.
And on the other side of things, one thing that I've found from working in the studio and live is that when you're using things like tube amplifiers, you'd think, well, in the studio you don't need to crank an amp very loud because you're not trying to play in front of a lot of people. But a tube amplifier, the louder you crank it,
we're getting
typically
into that for sure,
the better it sounds. So
right.
It's very similar to live in that respect. So I found that, you're gonna, and as far as like the level you put your guitar live is actually typically pretty similar to what we do in the studio, because that gets across a certain air comes out of the speaker.
Sometimes
with certain kind of amplifiers,
and certain tones that you're going for, and then
of course.
And other times, it's the opposite.
Right.
Sometimes it's like, wow, we can really get this really focused sound because we're just going for this weird, like, kind of tight, but like not, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like this, sometimes you could go the amp very quiet, like low wattage. Not even so much like the Mesa Boogies have now this thing on.
You can switch the wattage.
You can switch the wattage on the amp, and you're actually barely moving the speakers, but you're kind of overdriving the power section, but not really. The speakers aren't really moving a lot, and that's a different kind of saturation. That's a different kind of sound, and we'll show that the difference on that too. But yeah, for the most part, I generally record fairly loud on the stuff because again, I'm trying to. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I learned afterwards that there's a reason why that is, but I was always just like, well, that's how they play live. I'm going to try and get as close to that as I can. So crank the damn amp up, you know. I'm not going to try and...
It responds differently.
It totally responds differently. And again, it's all the player, but it's the player hearing that through the amp and the amp making the player play a certain way and the player making the amp respond a certain way. So it's all together. So, and then going to our point before you start. Tone is in the hands. Yeah. And I've said this, how long have I been saying this?
Forever. I mean, I recently was on a tour with Alice in Chains, and I was hanging out on side stage, and I was talking to Jerry Cantrell about seeing Alice in Chains open for Van Halen years ago. And, you know, it was with Alice in Chains' original singer. They had just broken out with Man in the Box. They were just like a new band opening for Van Halen, and they only played like a really short set, and I remember being like, God, I wish they played longer than Van Halen played for like 2 hours, and it was cool. And I was just talking to him about that, and he said, you know, on that tour I got to play through Eddie Van Halen's rig. I went and I took the same guitar and I plugged through the same exact gear, and it sounded like me. It did not sound like Eddie Van Halen. And then Eddie Van Halen picked up my stuff, picked up my guitar through my gear, played through my stuff, and it sounded like Eddie Van Halen. Yeah. You know, the gear, it really was in his hands. I mean, Eddie had a sound, and you can color it with whatever you want, but that style and that technique and that sound did largely come from his hands.
Think about it, when you think about, honestly, like going to the Van Halen records, and there was a shift a little bit after like the first 3 records, and he switched to this like really kind of like chorused out guitar sound, as opposed to like the first 4 records were really, well, the first 3 were really, that was like the same, basically more of the same guitar sound. And by the way, there's again, going to the YouTube thing or the isolated guitar tracks, there's ones for some of the first Van Halen record, the Running with the Devil guitar sound, which is amazing. And you can find that, and I actually found the multi-tracks on that one. And the funny thing is that part of the way I know that Ted Templeman recorded them, he recorded them all in the same room at Sunset Sound. Like he treated it like their live set. He treated it like a live recording. So the amps were in the room with the drums. The guitar is almost as loud on the drum overheads as it is, like you pull up the drums and mute the guitars, and it's like for Running with the Devil, and you could hear the guitar exactly pretty much how you hear it on the record, just a little quieter, but there it is. And it's like, and that's another one, you know, like that's another thing that I've done with a few bands that, you know, you're part of the guitar sound. It's like the bleed and how it's interacting with the room and how it's interacting with the drums, and the drums are resonating from the guitar, and like all that influences the sound. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent here a little bit, but point being that Eddie Van Halen, his guitar setup had changed over the years. He went from this one like custom guitar, and then these Kramer guitars, and then his own, the EVH guitars or whatever, the Music Man one, the Wolfgang model, and then, but what happens when you listen to Van Halen on pretty much any record? You can hear the intro guitar and you go, that's Van Halen. You know it. And he's multiple different setups, different studios, different microphones, I'm sure, different amps. It all sounds like him.
Yeah.
And it's
and as producers, you can't always influence somebody being prepared, but if you can, that helps. You know, they're coming in prepared and they're playing with confidence, and they are able to do the work that helps you guys, you know, get what you need.
Your technique or lack of sometimes.
Can really affect the tone,
which
the guitar
is,
tone.
exactly. Some of these guys, like, you see them and they play like wrong, technically the wrong way, and it's like, who cares? They're getting a sound out of the guitar. Look at what was the guy who played the guitar with his feet? You know what I'm talking about? There's a guy who plays. Jeff Healy's he's blind, right? And he plays it sitting down.
I don't remember the foot guy.
Do you know what I'm talking about? There's a guy who played with.
Not Jeff Healy. He's the blind guy.
Right, he's the blind
Jeff
guy.
Healy, yeah.
But like the way he plays, it's like it's not, that's obviously complete. He plays it sitting down and he plays it all like,
Yeah.
But that's his sound and that's his technique. Your technique or lack of technique is going to influence your sound. So to me, when you go through it and then
Starts at the source.
it starts at the source. So, and I always say, like, I sit there and I listen to the guitar player play through his rig, whoever it is. Like, I'm like, let me hear what you got, and before we even think about getting the sound in the studio, it's just like, I'm usually doing pre-production, so I'm listening and I'm getting an idea there, and I'm like listening to their amps and I'm like listening to how they're playing, and then it's like, tailor the sound to the player. Don't go the opposite way. Don't, I've seen instances, and I've even had instances before I was a producer where, it's like, oh, well, that's great. This is a great sound. You guys are great. I really love working with you guys. Now, use this guitar and use this amp that I have in the studio. And they force the player to use what they have in the, as a house amp or whatever. Because again, they're in their comfort zone, and they just use this. It's like, that's great, but why don't you try this? And it's like, I've had instances where people bring in really, really terrible gear, and I know, and when they tell me what their intent is and what they're trying to go for, then I'll be like, well, if you're really going for this kind of Mesa Boogie, you're not going to get there with your Crate 120. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. Like, no matter how much you try, you can't force it enough to, it'll get something that'll be cool, but you're not going to get what you're looking for. So then if it quacks like a duck, use the duck. You know what I mean? It's like, try and, like, if you're trying to get that kind of Mesa kind of sound, you're going to need to get something that's similar to a Mesa or a Mesa itself. A tube head, you're not going to get that sound with a solid state head. Solid state heads are great, but, and they have their place, and I love them. I've gotten some great guitar sounds with solid state heads. But if it's like, if you're going for that particular sound, you go, yeah, that's pretty much, I'm sure that's a tube amp. You're going to have to use a tube amp. Yeah. It's very simple.
No technique is going to turn that into
No technique is going to do that. And again, but don't force it. You have to make sure, you have to listen and respond to what the player's doing and adjust to get the end result and tailor the sound to how he's playing. Not say, okay, well, play like this, and it's like, well, I don't really play with that much gain. It's like, tough. You don't do that. You're trying to always, it's the client. You're trying to ultimately serve the client no matter what, even if it's yourself. But the main thing is, don't force it. Round peg in a square hole thing. I know it's
can't feed a lion lettuce and turn him into a vegetarian.
Exactly.
It is what it is.
And again, it's the player, and and then you have, like I said, you have players I have players that come in with the best gear and the completely wrong technique, because they just think, oh, well, I'll get this and I'll get that and I'll get this really expensive, I'll get a $4,500 Les Paul custom, and I'll get a Bogner Ecstasy, or I'll be whatever, a diesel amp, a $4,000 amp, and like just the best stuff. And I'm using Monster cable with everything, or Mogami cable, and it's all the greatest things and all the best pedals. And it's like, if your technique isn't right, you're never going to get it right. So, which goes to my next thing. And I know this is a really simple and really, almost, it's too obvious, but learn your craft. Practice, 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 practice. And that goes for engineers, with experimenting with sounds and learning your craft. I feel like learning your craft, it starts with the musician, obviously, and it filters down through what I do. Learn your craft. You have to practice. You have to trial and error. Don't be afraid to be wrong. You're going to fail more times than you succeed until you really start building up a repertoire. Yeah, it's learn your craft. You have to just practice and you have to get it right, because too many people they think there's too many shortcuts. And nowadays, because I feel like and this is kind of like, I feel like a little bit of an old school, like it's a Luddite or whatever, and it's like a diatribe going off on this like, oh, these kids nowadays, they don't practice. But a lot of people, I find there's always been that element where some people just they don't practice and they think there's like some magic in the studio that you can do things. And fortunately and unfortunately, nowadays, this is true. But what that does to me, the ability for people to take an okay track and edit it like crazy and make it perfect, to me, that takes away the whole point of learning your craft, because the engineer is not learning the musician's not learning their craft because they know it can be fixed. So they're getting kind of lazy, and they're not really getting in the studio, being prepared, and having their parts all dialed in and having their technique dialed in. So it already creates a little bit of an aura of laziness, so they don't practice as much. The producer doesn't practice as much because he doesn't practice coaxing the performance out of the player. And just knowing that he can just go, okay, play through it once. That's fine. I'll just go there and fix it.
I've definitely learned, I've been on that other side where I've said to Steve, I already played this riff, like, you got me to play it, like, perfect, and it took me, like, an hour. And now I'm doing it again, and you're saying, nope, do it again. I already played it perfect, just cut and paste it. If you're trying to make me play it perfect again, we have it, Like, you just start to get fatigued, and you start to, it's the Mr. Miyagi thing, like, why do I gotta paint this fence for 4 hours? Like, just show me, let's move on, And, but what I realized is that it's not perfect. Like, it's just getting it to sound right. It's gonna be different every single time you play it. The stress you have of being anxious, just like fatigued and being like, you've just played it for an hour, that comes off in the take. Yep. Your strings getting a little dull makes it even different, something different about it. Your pick getting a little less sharp. All these different things make all these little details that, like I said, God is in the details. It's all those, you could probably get away with cut and pasting it once, maybe twice, but like, where do you draw the line? Because it's all those little kind of inconsistencies and
all those nuances.
Little things and nuances, and it might have been a slightest hair off, but like it sounds good together. It's all those things that create something that has energy and life. It doesn't sound computerized, and so I realize that you have to take those steps, and you have to go through that in those early stages in order to make something that's great at the end.
Right, and it's so, like he says, and he'll tell you, I'll tell him to do it again, and I'll be like, why? And I'm like, I never ever go for perfection, ever. It's just what feels right to me. Because it's, going for perfection is like the technique I was talking about just a minute ago is like lining it all up, and you're on a grid, and you're like, oh, let's make every attack hit with the kick drum. Let's move it right on the thing, and like perfection is
right, and
perfection is boring.
Yeah,
it's
not
really
synonymous.
boring.
Right and perfect are not synonymous. Like,
no.
And that's something I think you're going to show a little later, like how something sounds right. It may not necessarily look right, but that's not important.
Yeah, and even sound too. Like, there's plenty of stuff, even on the new stuff. It's like you can hear it. The guitars are like, if you're really focusing and listening to the guitars left and right, like the two rhythm guitars, they're not really on at all with each other, but it feels right. And it's always been a gut thing with me, and it's just like, that feels good. It's good, and it's developing that, learning your craft and developing that muscle of knowing to you what feels right. And that's, to me, that's my definition of perfect, but it's not perfect. Perfect is so not perfect.
And that's your job as a producer, as opposed to just being a technician. Anyone can learn how to use plugins or gear, but if you want to really be a producer, I say, develop that skill, and that takes time, and it's not, you can't be lazy, I guess.
Yeah, no,
you wanna
that's
really
pretty
build
much
that.
it. It's just all about really digging in and just doing the work.